Hello everyone, welcome to my channel and Merry Christmas to you. I know I've been absent quite a lot, but this session has been really hard because I had a course that I hated. So now that that's done, I hope to be able to run this channel better than the last few months. I really love creating content and making videos. So I'm gonna try to balance my personal life with my studies so I can put more time in this channel. I'm making this video a bit early. Today is the 27th of December. But I didn't know if I was going to be busy during the weekend, so I had some time today and I decided to record it. I'm currently reading 2 books, so it's a bit unfair that I'm making this video before the year is over. But you know, I could always include them in the next year's video. Okay, so my criterion for choosing my top 10 books of 2023 is based on 3 elements. One is my level of enjoyment. The other is the quality of the book, like the quality of the writing. And the third element is the lasting effect that book has had on me. So if I can't stop thinking about a book, that means that that book had a great impact on my thoughts and how I think about similar works of fiction. It means that there was something about that work that touched me deeply and it's going to stick with me for a long time. And when a work stirs your feelings in that way, it has to be relevant. It's for a reason. So that's why I consider that as well. So this year I read 70 books. I think last year I read 80 or 86. But my goal this year was to read 60 books and enjoy them. I wanted to dedicate more time to reading each book instead of reading a lot of books. So yeah, so I'm quite glad that I actually surpassed my expectations. And I think I did enjoy reading this year more than I did last year. In the place number 10, I put Flannery O'Connor's The Violent Buried Away. The reason why this didn't score higher is because I read this recently and it is a book that you have to discuss in order to understand its themes. I listened to one podcast about it, but I couldn't find many of them. I wish I could talk to someone about this novel because it is great. This was a recommendation from my American literature professor, and it is a Southern Gothic novel. It really has all the elements of the Southern Gothic genre with a focus on religion. I recommend this novel, but bear in mind that it can be very racist at some parts. My professor actually warned me about the racism in this novel, but I have previously read about Flannery O'Connor and how racist she could be both as a writer and as a person. And so I was expecting the novel to be more racist than it actually was. That doesn't make the novel less racist, but the work itself is worth studying and especially analyzing its themes within its historical context. The story is about a boy who is kidnapped as a child and who is groomed into becoming a prophet. It starts with the death of his great uncle, who is the guy who kidnapped him, and from there the boy needs to discover the Christian dichotomy of good and evil, and how sometimes what we think it's good is not actually good, and what we think it's bad is not actually bad, and how that sometimes looks in the eyes of God. It will be reductive to try to summarize it here in this video because it's very complex. But Flannery O'Connor basically uses the concept of creation and destruction as a whole and symbols of creation and destruction. For instance, baptism is connected to drowning and how it symbolizes death and rebirth. So it has very complex religious ideas, and that's why I would like to discuss this novel with someone who have read it. In the place number 9, I put Affinity by Sarah Waters. I talked about this novel before in my channel, so I'm not going to get too deep into this, but the novel is about a woman who is a lesbian in the 19th century and ends up falling in love with an inmate who is imprisoned for acting as a medium spirit and defrauding people. In many ways, this novel is very similar to Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. The only difference is that this is a romance gothic novel, but it doesn't follow the love conquers all theme. It's more about the struggles that women who were not straight experienced in the 19th century. The reason why I put this novel on my top 10 list is because this session I had to study William Butler Yeats, and I was listening to some podcasts of him and his relationship with the spiritualist movement of the 19th century, and I realized how good Sarah Waters' research was in regards to this novel. And again, not only the story is very compelling, it's historical fiction. So to me, that's very important to include things that create a historical setting, a setting that is historically realistic. I mean, it means you did the job, right? In the place number 8, I put A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is the story of a count that is sentenced to house arrest in the Metropole, a hotel in Moscow. To me, this story was super heartwarming. Alexander, who is our main character, embodies the best idea of a gentleman. He's not just a gentleman because he comes from the aristocracy, but because he himself embodies the best qualities of a gentleman, like virtue. He's a very brave and virtuous man who faces every bad thing that happens to him with grace and charm. Overall, the story is very stoic. It really teaches you that sometimes you have to accept the circumstances and make the best of them. But it also shows you that you have to learn when to fight. That acceptance has its limitations. Amor Towles has a way of writing characters that makes the reader connect to them instantly. There are 1 or 2 characters that appear a single time and then we don't see them anymore. And still their stories are going to stick with you and are going to make you think about those situations. So this is something that I highly recommend to everyone who loves reading Russian literature. I think the writer is American, but he still does it very well. The historical context, the world building, it's amazing. I don't know much about Russia or about Russian history, but I was a ballet dancer, and he mentions the Bolshoi, and the description of the ballerinas and some of the things they do was very, very accurate. It was something very, very particular, and I think I couldn't appreciate the effort he put into this book because I just didn't have the knowledge about Russian history that this book requires. But nonetheless, I really, really enjoyed the story, and I think it's a story that most people will love. In place number 7, I put My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I read this for Halloween and this story surpassed my expectations. I can't believe this is a young adult novel because I usually don't like young adult novels. Most of the time it's because to me they all sound the same. They all follow the same tropes, but this felt very, very different. It feels like a mashup of Stranger Things and Heathers. So it has nostalgia if you like the 80s, but it also has very creepy elements. While I was reading this book, I kept thinking about my female friends and how our friendships develop. One of the things that surprised me about this novel was the way Grady Hendrix portrays women and female friendship. He does it in a way that is very realistic, and I don't want to sound mean, but for a man to portray women in this way, it's very shocking to me because men usually don't get it right. I was listening to an interview of Hendrix, and he was saying how he grew up with lots of women. So apparently that's how he came up with these great characters because they are amazing. I love how he plays with stereotypes of beauty, like one of the characters struggles with acne scars. That's something we don't see, especially in young adult fiction. I feel like female characters are usually super perfect and beautiful, which is not bad. There are perfect and beautiful women in real life. It's just, it feels unrealistic when every young adult novel that you read have basically the same description of men and women. So I really loved his portrayal of women and his portrayal of female friendship, and how the horror part of the story reflects the struggles of female friendship and the things that women do to overcome those struggles. So I do recommend this novel to everyone. It's a wonderful book, very funny. Bear in mind that it has a lot of black humor. I took points because of some comments that the characters made. I'm not saying by any means that necessarily reflects the way the author feels, but again, I can see how it can make some people feel uncomfortable. In the place number 6, I put The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. I really struggle to read this book because, okay, just look at this. It's very thin, it's only 160 pages, but when I was reading this book, I realized that very important ideas were condensed in a few pages. Like every single sentence felt very relevant, and it was difficult to kind of highlight and come up with the general idea of each chapter. This book's main argument is higher education for Black people. Du Bois also brings his concepts of the veil and double consciousness. But the main point is higher education for Black people. Du Bois is against Booker T. Washington's idea of education. Du Bois argues that higher education should be available for Black people because the whole community of African Americans will benefit from that. If Black people don't have access to higher education, they will not be able to have teachers for schools and people prepared enough to represent the Black community in the government or the police and in other social and professional spheres. So he says that representation is very important because it's the only way that the ideas and the interests of the Black community could be taken into account. The reason why I put this book in this list is because it contains a lot of historical context to understand American literature. Bear in mind that this was published in 1903, so that's going to be the context. So yeah, I think it is a book that everyone should read to understand better American literature and American history. In the place number 5, I put Playing in the Dark by Toni Morrison. This book I borrowed from the library, so I have to return it. But I think I'm gonna buy a copy for me because I want to reread this book. It's very thin. It's only like 100 pages. There are 3 essays inside, and this was a series of lectures that Toni Morrison gave. I think it was at Harvard University. This book was also a recommendation from my literature professor for one of my essays. I read a few pages for my essay and I ended up liking what Toni Morrison was saying. The book is about how white authors create their character's identity based on an Africanist presence. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the novels have to contain a Black character. It's just the identities of these characters are being defined in contrast to the other. In this case, it's an Africanist presence or an Africanist element in the book. So it doesn't have to be a character, it can be something else. So this book is not necessarily about racism. Even Toni Morrison says that in the preface. So I would recommend this book for anyone studying American literature and especially studying the novels of white authors. I think her point is very important and it's worth considering whenever you study American novels. I'm actually planning a video where I think I'm going to include Toni Morrison's point of view. So I highly recommend this. It's super interesting. It's short. It's very easy to understand. The language is very accessible to the reader. It feels like a scholarly work, but intended for a wider audience. So check this out if you're interested. In the place number 4, I put Absalom by William Faulkner. I have talked a lot about this novel in my previous videos. The reason why I chose this book is because it stuck with me. I can't stop thinking about this novel. It's a kind of story that haunts you. The only thing that I'm going to say is that I'm not sure if I would recommend this for everyone because it's extremely difficult to read. It takes courage to go through it because there's no punctuation in many of the pages. The stream of consciousness element is very strong, but it is a wonderful story. At the end of it, you don't feel like you wasted your time. Again, it's a Southern Gothic story, so it has those elements of the Southern Gothic. It is a genre that usually has a lot of racism. But again, it's a very interesting book to study, and I really love that. I love when stories challenge me and push me to learn more and to read more in order to understand them. So this is a wonderful book in many ways. To me, it's a book about many things, but especially about intersectionality, miscegenation, and the inevitability of progress and modernity. So yes, this is one of the books that I'm always thinking about, and I want to reread it. If it wasn't so difficult to read, I would have reread it sooner, but I think next year I'm gonna try to go through it again. In the third place, I put Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. This story also haunts me. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the story. This is basically the original story of My Fair Lady, which is a movie that I didn't like. The reason for this is that George Bernard Shaw was not trying to create a romance. There is a romantic aspect going on in the story, but the story is not a romantic one. It is about a man who transforms a woman, and by doing so, he basically declasses her. She doesn't have any money, but because she now knows about wealth and can speak properly, has surrounded herself with people from the higher class, she can no longer be part of the class where she belongs. So that's the whole point, the whole idea. And it also questions some gender dynamics between men and women in the 19th century. Again, I didn't like My Fair Lady because I feel it tells the story from the male gaze. There is another film, I'm going to link it below. That one I absolutely loved. George Bernard Shaw was quite insulted because they changed the ending a little bit, but it's still that film stays true to the original story, while My Fair Lady is more of a love story. I think the play is material for a romance story. I just don't like the way My Fair Lady did it. So there's that. I do recommend this. If you like Oscar Wilde and his plays, you definitely are going to like this. This has a lot of humor. The main character is absolutely horrible, which is fine for me because I love horrible characters. He's quite of a neurodivergent, which is also great for me because I'm a neurodivergent. So it's great. Go read it. In the second place, I put The Wasteland and Other Poems by T.S. Eliot. I developed an obsession with T.S. Eliot during my American literature course. For this course, we had to read Gerontion, which is one of the poems in this collection. I love the poem, and because we were seeing the modernist period, the professor kept referencing The Wasteland. So I decided to buy a copy and read the whole poem, and I absolutely adore it. And ever since then, I have read the poem, I'm not exaggerating, like 40 times. You can find an amazing audio version on Spotify. It's great. The other poems are also amazing, especially the long ones, like The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, The Portrait of a Lady, and The Hollow Man. Those three are also great. The other ones I haven't paid too much attention, like I haven't got the time to go through them, but my favorite was definitely The Wasteland. Like, there are many things about that poem that feel so relatable, especially to the theme of cultural loss, that it really had a deep effect on me. So I'm actually preparing a video about the secret history and its relationship with this poem, because this poem was essential to Donna Tartt in her process of writing the secret history. And you will see why. I'm not gonna go into that right now. I love this. I think everyone should read this poem. Everyone everyone should try to study. I think it has to be the most important poem of the 20th century. So yeah, go read it. Remember, you can listen to the audio in Spotify. So finally, for the first place, music please, I have The Count of Monte Cristo. Put it in the first place because the quality of the story is great. And also my level of enjoyment while reading this story was really high. I love this book. I think it's my favorite book of all times. I haven't reread this book because it's super long. But it's great. I have not much to say. Also, if you like Lord Byron like I do, this book, this novel is a node to Lord Byron. Like, there are many things Dumas is drawing from Lord Byron's poems, and that for me is what made the story even greater. If you are interested to know my thoughts about this novel, I'm going to link that video at the end of this video so you can check it out. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments which were your favorite novels or books from this year. Very interested to know your answers. Also, thank you so much for a wonderful year, for all your support, for the interesting discussions that you bring in the comments. The reason why I did this channel was to talk about books with people, and to me that's the most important part of it. Those discussions are very essential to me to understand many of these works and to understand the different perspective that people have about the same work of fiction. And again, thank you so much for being kind and respectful. It's something that I really appreciate. Have a happy new year and take care. Bye!